Good morning and welcome everybody from me, Laura Goodfellow, to our first Inclusive Innovation webinar covering environment and net zero. I'm Head of Business Engagement here at Interface, and we're delighted to be hosting this webinar in partnership with CEIS. So just to run through some housekeeping before I introduce the panel, you can ask questions throughout the webinar and these will be answered within the Q&A session at the end, which my colleague Fiona Kerr will be managing. To ask questions, if you use the chat functionality on the right-hand side of the screen, and please use the one labelled session, as this one's specifically for this workshop. The webinar is being recorded and will be hosted online afterwards, so we're asking all non-speaking participants to turn off their videos and microphones, please. So let me introduce you to who I have here with me on the panel. We've got Sean Kerr, Director of Sustainable Thinking, Scotland CIC, and Mark Taggart, Senior Research Fellow at UHI. So next slide. So the purpose of our webinar series, of which this is the second, is to support and facilitate innovation across Scotland's third sector. We want to raise awareness around the resources that are available to you to help address societal and/or environmental issues with your innovative ideas. Next slide. So for those that aren't aware of Interface, we provide a free service to individuals, organisations and businesses of all sizes across all sectors, matching them to Scotland's universities, colleges and research institutes for a variety of different projects. We have access to world-leading academic experts who are very interested in applied research, so looking into an idea or a challenge that somebody has, researching a solution and making sure it's practical to implement. We can also provide advice and support on a range of funding options to help offset the cost of these projects, including the Innovation Voucher Funding Programme, designed to support a business working with academia. Administered by Interface but approved by the Scottish Funding Council, these schemes are good for initial projects, and the long-standing Innovation Voucher Scheme has more recently been supplemented by the Workforce Innovation Voucher. This is in place for a really innovative review of how a business works and maximises its workforce efficiencies and productivities. Next slide. So our concept isn't new. We've been on the go for 16 years now, and in that time we've reached almost 3,500 businesses and got over 2,650 projects with an academic partner off the ground. This map shows the locations of the businesses that we have supported, and it shows the wide geographical reach across Scotland. Our team are based the length and breadth of Scotland, and it gives us the opportunity to really get to know the area and the businesses better. The collaborative projects that we've facilitated have supported new product development, access to new markets, new processes, increased revenue and profits, and new ways of doing things. And maybe that's particularly important to consider just now as we move on to the fireside chat section of our webinar. So the next slide, and Sean, I'm going to start with you. Can you tell me a little bit about the company and what inspired you to set it up?
Yeah, we are a social enterprise, a community interest company. We started in 2016. Myself and one of my other co-founders, Stephen, were originally picking up food for local food poverty groups. As part of the Fair Share programme, you're going to places like Asda and Tesco's and getting their fruit and vegetables.
Sean, your sound has dropped out.
I think we've got a technical problem. Sean, yeah. Can you see if your microphone has an arrow through it, or?
Just leave this a second or two while you try and sort it out. It is showing us on mute, but I think it did disconnect before that.
This is where you get to do a wee song and a dance, Laura. or you could start with some questions.
That's what I was just going to say. Mark, why don't we start with, we're going to learn all about the collaboration between Sustainable Thinking Scotland and yourselves, but many companies might consider that it's challenging to collaborate with a large academic institution. How do you ensure that you're supporting small businesses as well?
So in terms of supporting small businesses, I think there's probably several layers within UHI that can help with that. So UHI have a knowledge exchange team, and they kind of help to develop collaborations. They see obviously things like the interface inquiries coming through, so they help to join the businesses together with the appropriate scientists within UHI. And also, if we do a funding application, say to an interface funding application, they will support the funding application and make sure that that's written correctly and that it's ticking all the boxes. On a second level, I guess within the UHI, we also have a sector-specific knowledge exchange groups. So we have various business-facing innovation groups, for example. So we have a water quality innovation group, an energy group, aquaculture group. And that, again, brings together the relevant scientists within UHI that have an interest in those fields. And again, do out-facing workshops and things and ways to try to look at ways to try to engage with business. So there are various layers, if you like, of trying to support business and make sure that we can work with them effectively. But then also, I think at the coalface, if you like, I think it's important to have departments and institutes that are kind of agile enough to work with business. Certainly in this particular case, I work for ERI, so the Environmental Research Institute up in Thurso. We're quite a small institute with about 40 staff and postgrads. And as such, we're kind of small enough and agile enough to kind of work and respond quickly to businesses and their needs and be quite flexible in the way that we work and the way that we think. So hopefully, again, Sean can maybe attest to the fact that working with us hasn't been too big a challenge during the process. So.
No, absolutely. And before we get into the kind of specifics of the project, why is it so important to UHI to kind of engage with businesses?
So at the most basic level, basically, because that is where the research funding landscape is at the moment. So the research funding landscape that academia has to work within literally expects that of academia. So, there is always scope for fundamental kind of blue skies research, of course, and there's still an excellent place for that, and rightly so. But the funding landscape is very much about applied science these days and trying to foster innovation, new products, new services, drive economic growth, etc. So it's in the interests of academia to engage with that, obviously, because it's very much at the centre of the funding landscape. Likewise, obviously, we're interested as a university in having our research have real impact on the ground. And again, that's very much expected by the funding bodies. And so again, across the colleges and institutes that comprise UHI, we're keen to see research impact globally, but also in UHI and Scotland. So also, within the Highlands and Islands, but across Scotland, and what benefits the kind of business sector ultimately will benefit the universities and academia through the sort of local growth and local regeneration, etc., and generation of products, services, businesses, etc. So.
That's great. Thank you, Mark. And now, Sean, you're back online. We'll go back and you can tell us about the inspiration to set up your company.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Fingers crossed it works this time. I'm not sure what's happening there. Anytime I plugged it in, it just wasn't going. But yeah, we started up in October 2016 with the aim of trying to grow local fresh fruit and vegetables that we could donate to food banks. When we'd seen the products that you were picking up as part of the kind of fair share project, it's almost as if it was treated as a food waste issue, where the lowest quality food that was just about to go into the bin was being given to the people that were most vulnerable in our society. So for us, we decided that there had to be a better way to do that. So we started growing our own local fruit and vegetables and donating it through. But then you start to run into the things that you need as a gardener or someone that's producing food, that you need compost, you need feed, you need seeds. So we then had to expand our project to try and cover things like green waste recycling, and then producing biochar, which is a project that we're developing just now with UHI. We then had to go on to do educational workshops as a way of trying to economically fund the social support projects that we were doing. And then that's kind of grew into having our own educational hub up on the site, where we try and bring people in and teach them about community well-being, recycling, food growing, give them a little bit of a space if they want to develop their own sort of social enterprise as well.
Okay. And what was it that encouraged you to contact Interface? How did a university even pop into your mind as a potential partner for this project?
Well, the biochar that we are creating, the actual market and the field itself is really under-regulated within the UK and Scotland particularly. There's currently only a position statement by SEPA on how it's produced rather than how it's applied or anything further. There is research out with the UK that suggests it can be used for certain applications, But to get SEPA to verify that, then we needed to actually produce the research ourselves and work with the great team up at UHI to then get the information that we needed that would bolster our position and how we wanted to move it forward. We were lucky enough that we were part of the First Port Launch Me accelerator, and we met Shelley Breckenridge there and started talking to her about it. It was a very iterative process. There wasn't a very formal way to do it. We just knocked it back and forward, what we wanted to do and how we wanted to go, and then took it from there.
And if we drill down on that a little bit more, like what would you say a summary of the collaboration that you've got with UHI is, sort of a summary of the project? And then Mark, will come to you to kind of almost like by reply say how UHI are supporting that project.
Yeah, basically we wanted to first of all characterise the biochar that we were producing, see what its key parameters were as it's produced, and then how we can then adjust them to do exactly what we were aiming to do. The team up at the university were then looking at the kind of chemical and thermochemical functionalizations that they needed to do to the biochar to optimize the parameters that we wanted. When we've got the initial research with the Standard Innovation Voucher with UHI, that was way back in September last year, I believe. So we then have developed forward. We then got funding for a collaborative research project, which provided more further analysis on all of the biochar and then looked at a bit more depth of how we wanted to adjust the chemical changes. So that involved not only UHI, but also the University of Strathclyde. So that allowed us to bring in another academic partner. We've also gone on to get a PhD studentship with the University of Strathclyde. We're also looking to do the exact same with the University of the Highlands and Islands. And from opportunities that have came from Shelley again, she's got back in touch with us and gave us opportunities in terms of business development. So we're now working as well with the Adam Scott Business School through in the University of Glasgow to try and think about business strategy and promotion and marketing and how we then develop the biochar project in terms of its economic potential as well as the academic potential that UHI are helping with.
Okay. Mark, do you want to explain kind of almost on a practical level how UHI are doing that from your perspective?
So that's the interfacing programs in the UHI exchange involved.
I think it might be your turn for sound issues now, Mark.
You still hear me? No?
We've got you, but it's very crackly.
Any better?
In the end, I just had to refresh the browser.
I'll give you a wee second to refresh the browser, but we might be nipping back to you, Sean, just now. Can you think of the kind of, what would you consider the hardest thing for a kind of business when they're thinking about collaborating with a university? What might the kind of barriers be to kind of taking that first step?
Those initial first steps are fairly daunting, especially for a young startup social enterprise. Most of the people that we find in this field are starting up not because they have a particularly strong business idea, but they have a desire to help people and a social impact that they want to make. So that usually comes first. So we understand that when you're a young startup, you're trying to do everything yourself. You don't really have the money or the resources to externally bring in the people that you're wanting to deal with. So having the opportunity to work with Interface to sort of broker the initial input from an academic, then see exactly what the potential of that would be, and then develop it through to be able to speak to them and see how you want to shape a project together, as well as the various funding opportunities that you can access to get them. But for me personally, the things like the legal work, where you had to obviously get legal working agreements and you have to go through all the rest of the funding procedures, if like us, you're doing it all in-house, it can be a little bit full on at first, that you're not expecting it all. But again, that's where working with a really good academic partner comes in, because we had people like Barbara and Anna, who were the backroom staff up at UHI. So they were fantastic at being able to have guides or tutorials, or even just to give them a quick phone and speak to them about how is best to work this through or how we should actually do it. But again, once you're started with Interface, you can always go back to them, and as an independent broker, they'll be able to give you some more advice on what you should be looking for, what you're expecting, and then where you're aiming to go.
And Sean, what would you say the benefits have been so far? So what's happened that would not have been able to happen without collaborating with universities, UHI and others?
Yeah, I mean, within the last year, there's been a massive acceleration on everything that we've done in terms of the biochar project. For the 3 years previous, we'd been trying to build all of the information analogously and then try and work it through into how we wanted to do it. But once we started connecting with UHI, it opened up a lot of doors, not in just the connections of the people that we needed to speak to, whether it be in SEPA or if you want to then go through other funding mechanisms to try and get some more money. Working with an academic partner bolsters any application that you're putting into any sort of funding program. So us being able to have the input of our academic partners has helped us then get the collaborative research project, which meant that we could do phase 2 almost instantly as we were doing phase 1. We're now looking at getting phase 3 funding, and again, it's been a lot easier because we've got the previous work that the universities have done, that we can say, well, we're hitting these targets, or we're meeting these parts in our milestones in our development, and this is where we want to go to. And with the backing of an academic partner, that's much easier to pitch to a funder. So for us, there's been a lot of development to the point where now, not only do we have a biochar project that's properly researched, and we have enough of a background science that we can then go to SEPA and start to get the policies that we require changed, or the regulations created that we want to do. We then now also have things like a 4-year PhD student that's going to be a more long-term version of being able to explore the potential of all the biochar. But then all the additional things, like I said, have a multi-project company. So Mark has connections up at the university that can not only help us in the biochar side of things, but in the food production and the social side of things that we're doing as well. So again, whilst it might only seem like an initial kind of opening the door, getting your foot in the door sort of thing, once you start to speak to an academic partner, the potential for the things that you've got are beyond what you could possibly conceive of at the start. So for us, it's been a great year. It's been amazing to be able to develop different parts of the project and see how it's all now going to fit together and create this circular economy that we're looking to do to develop the product.
Amazing, thank you. And Mark, I still want to know on a practical level what UHI are doing to support this project, but also in addition to that, there's obviously the kind of the varied collaborations. So what are your kind of top tips as well? So tell on how to get the best of these kind of relationships when a business is working with the UHI team.
Can you hear me again now?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I'll start with that second question first, and then we can go back if you want to. But in terms of top tips, I think for me, it's about being open, flexible, agile, and realistic from the outset. So I think both parties really need to come into it with that kind of mindset. In my experience with business and university collaborations, it's not uncommon to kind of begin with quite unrealistic expectations, where the kind of business and the university are kind of a little bit apart on where they want to go and what they want to achieve. But in terms of the amount of funding that's available, which can often be quite limited, or the amount of time that's quite available, which again can be quite limited. So at the outset, we need to have some very open conversations to iron out those kind of things and make sure that everybody's definitely on the same page and understands what can and can't be done in terms of the funding limits and the timescales. Businesses naturally tend to want to do things very quickly and at very low cost, whereas researchers tend to be more methodical and robust and want publishable data. And the reality is that research just isn't cheap. So some of the material testing and things that we've been doing has been quite expensive. So I think this collaboration has worked really well, just because both parties have come into it with that really open, flexible, agile and realistic approach. So it's worked really well. In terms of how we've helped, again, with those 3 layers, so the university has, through the knowledge exchange team, the university has injected another £2,500 into the initial innovation voucher project to try to make sure that all worked well for both parties. And in terms of on the ground, actually up at where the institute that I work in, so in Environmental Research Institute, we've got a small team there with Dr. Sabal Pap, who's a material scientist and engineer, and myself, who's a chemist. So it's us that's been doing the research, if you like, at the coal face. And then going forward, again, the KE team will kick back in again to help us kind of support longer term ambitions and longer term funding applications, or what else we can do next, etc. So.
Okay, no, that's interesting. And both of you have touched on the kind of the knowledge exchange support that's available through as well. So there's kind of, you know, the 3 partners, if you like. You've kind of got your research and your academic team, you've got your company, and you've got the knowledge exchange team that are supporting through that and through the kind of contractual relationships as well, which is fantastic. And would you say all of those points that you kind of mentioned are the kind of the top tips in terms of building that long-term collaboration? So it's not just a duck in, duck out, it is a kind of long game in terms of the relationship.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. As Mark said, you really need to be realistic at the start if you're going to get the outcomes that you're trying to achieve. Because you're a relatively young startup social enterprise, you can't really be making too many mistakes. So someone that's coming in and being honest with you at the forefront and saying, whilst you might want this, it's maybe a bit further back and we need to do steps A, B, and C before we get there. You need that. You don't want people sugarcoating any of the stuff that you're doing, because as Mark says, some of the material science stuff costs a lot of money. So you need to make sure that you're directing all of your resources and your inputs in the exact area. But that's, again, where the knowledge transfer partnership comes in. And if there is additional information that you need to get to the outcome you're aiming for, it's always there and available. So a good academic partner really helps with all that.
Okay, and Sean, we've entitled this series of webinars Inclusive Innovation. So can you explain a little bit about how you're supporting in developing countries?
Yeah, I mean, for the work that we're doing just now, a lot of that has a bigger application in places where it's harder to grow fruit and vegetables, where you have problems like water retention or nutrient retention. So for us, there's a place that this could go to that would be allowing it to work. But at least in our experience, the inclusive innovation is something that we never felt that we would be able to get to the point where you're dealing with academics at this level. When you initially think that you're just starting up to grow some fruit and vegetables for people that are struggling, to then take that massive jump into turning this into an innovative business that's going to then be driving things forward on a different economic path.
I think we might just have lost you again, Sean. I think it's live TV here. So anyway, Mark, have we any final thoughts from you?
I guess in terms of final thoughts, all I would say is that, you know, business and university collaborations can really work. I mean, not necessarily all the time, but in many cases, in my experience, and especially if you get the right partnership and the right fit and everybody's on the right page. So, you know, I would encourage businesses to kind of embrace the opportunity to work with academia more if they can, and kind of start the conversations. As far as I'm concerned, the academic doors are very, very much open and open for this kind of collaboration, and we could be doing far more, I suspect. So.
Perfect. And just before we jump to the questions, because we have got one, Sean, can you tell us what's next for Sustainable Thinking Scotland?
For next, for us, it's phase 3 research. So we'd like to get everything from the sort of proof of concept stage that we're at just now, right through to case studies and it actually being applied in the environment that we're looking to do it. Again, that's where UHI come in, having worked with them over the past year. The level and standard of the work that they do from both Mark and from Sabi is outstanding, and it's them that we really want to drive this project forward with. So more collaboration, hopefully more social impact, and hopefully develop.
We've lost you again, Sean. I can see one question, but it is for yourself, Sean. Fiona, have you got any other questions?
No, just the one from Izzy in the question and answer. Do you want me to read that one out?
Yeah, please.
So Izzy's asked, how are you matched to the HEI and academics? There could be a number of institutions that you can partner with. So I guess that's probably for you, Laura.
Yeah, so Izzy, so how we work as interfaces, so we basically represent all the universities across Scotland. So when we're engaging with a business and we've said that we're going to work with all sizes, all sectors across the country, we'll chat with the business, like, what is the business challenge? And in a way, kind of almost get them to step back from what they kind of think the solution might be. Is actually, let's put it back to basics and what is the business challenge? And we will frame that up in our project outline form, and we'll present that to each of the universities that we think might have relevant expertise. And both Sean and Mark mentioned the Knowledge Exchange Office, and that is who the kind of inquiries go through. So they have then given sort of 2 weeks to speak to their academics, course leaders, researchers, to come back to Interface and say, yeah, we're really interested in being involved in this project. This is how we would perhaps tackle it. This is a potential funding option that we could explore. And we'll collate all of those findings and send them back to the company to review. So it's almost like a mini proposal that's coming back from each of the institutions. So after that kind of time, we would try and encourage the company in the first instance to maybe speak to one institution just to kind of manage kind of the time and the resource, both for the company and the university. But if there was an interest in speaking to more than one, then absolutely we would facilitate those discussions. it's sort of worth noting as well that companies often come to us in the majority of the time for seeking expertise that's out with the discipline of their own. So they might have 2 or 3 different areas that they want to explore. It might be specific facilities that they want to investigate that could be perhaps expensive to purchase, but they could access those through an institution. So Sean mentioned as well, it's that kind of ongoing relationship as well. So we hope that it'll be a sustained relationship with the university, but also with Interface as well. And as we kind of get to know, we mentioned the kind of local contacts, the local relationships, we kind of get to know our businesses. And if we see something in the public domain that might be of interest to them, or perhaps a university asked us to share, we'll kind of target them specifically to say, is this of interest? So yeah, that's how we would kind of identify from there. Hope that answers your question. I can see a couple of others now that we've got you back, Sean, in the chat. James is asking, would sustainable thinking have progressed as much or as quickly without the support of UHI or Interface?
Definitely not. Without their support, the year that we've had wouldn't be possible. Again,
We've lost Sean again, but we'll take that as a positive kind of note. I'm going to jump back to Izzy's question as well about the NDAs and other agreements. So Izzy, you've asked, I would assume that there are NDAs and other agreements with the engagement to protect commercial interest. At what stage the partners sign these? So at the initial stage, the Interface would be identifying expertise. We would not be signing a confidentiality agreement because we would be sharing information that's not commercially sensitive in order to identify the right academic partner for you. Once you go into then detailed discussions with an institution, yes, you would put an NDA in place if you wanted. And again, that's something where the Knowledge Exchange Office would support with that. In terms of a contract, there is a common template contract that was agreed with all of the universities in relation to the innovation voucher that we mentioned, which is one option in terms of delivering the project. So there is a standard contract there with 3 kind of options in terms of IP that you would agree at the outset. So there would be no approval of funding without that conditions being agreed. But again, the 3 partners are key: the university, the academic, the Knowledge Exchange Office, and the company. For keeping things on track and agreed. Sean, Rose Bulger said she'd love to order some biochar but can't find your website.
We actually don't have one at the moment. We mostly just use our Facebook page. And the reason we're not selling our biochar currently is I'm a bit of a worrier. I like to make sure all the boxes are ticked before we do anything. So with the really under-regulated position on how you can apply biochar at the moment, we're trying to develop all of that with SEPA before we put anything into the soil. Even with the stuff that we grow, we've done analogous tests that show that you can grow more food with a better crop yield in a biochar-based soil, but we don't donate any of that to the food bank because it goes to the same problem as I don't want the people that are struggling the most to be put in the most risk. So for us, we want to make sure that we've got all the science to make sure that there's no environmental leaching from the biochar or any additional things that we don't want going back into the soil before we actually start doing it. But yeah, as soon as we have it available, Rose, I will send you the link and you can more than welcome to buy some.
Perfect. I think Highlands just shared the link to your Facebook page there just now. And Ian Sutherland's asking, can you say something about the biochar production process? So the raw materials, the uses of the products, and why SEPA is involved?
Yeah, basically we take in waste wood. So as far as SEPA's got it, it's got a waste classification and it can't be used for anything else really. So we take in the waste wood and we process it down to about 10 or 15 centimeters long by about the same again in diameter. It's usually mostly trees or logs that we've chopped down ourselves. We have an estate that we're currently in, and it's a 200-acre estate that hasn't been properly maintained for about 20 years. So as they're starting to do work now, rather than them having to pay for the disposal of it, they just drop it off at our site and then we deal with it from there. So we take the waste wood in, it goes into our biochar kiln, and our kiln has 2 different cylinders in it. So you've got an inner chamber, which is where you generate a fire, which creates the heat that you need. And the outer chamber is where the wood is that you would turn into biochar. That allows the actual biocharing wood to be baked almost at about 450 to 500 degrees. And it releases all the moisture, all the syngas. And then the kiln that we have is specially designed to take all of those greenhouse gases and then just reburn them through the process. So that it then uses that as the last 4 hours of driving the process. But essentially, you're trying to limit the amount of oxygen that goes towards the biochar, and then you're basically have a porous microcarbon that you can then use as an absorbent for anything that you would really like. We then take it out, and then when you're trying to put that into any sort of environment, whether that's within the soil or an aqueous environment, if it's going into a lake or a loch or a water body, then you need to actually have SEPA's approval to be able to do that, because they need to be able to know what you're releasing into the environment. So that's where they come into it. So you want them to be able to then say the biochar that you've produced is now a useful resource rather than still a waste product. So that allows you to then open up the amount of avenues that you can use to apply it.
Okay. And Sean, Izzy says your organisation's purpose is brilliant, which I think we can all agree on that.
Oh, thank you.
Is there anything else you want to add, Sean? Just because we kind of recognise we kind of got a few, you might have been halfway through a couple of stories. So is there anything you want to add?
In terms of the question James asked about the support from UHI via interface, as I was saying, there is no way we could have made the acceleration that we have this last year without the support of UHI and interface for them. It broker all of that for us. I wasn't quite prepared for how quickly we would be able to get the results back, how well the work would be done, and the amount of work that would be possible within the really short time frame. Because, as Mark will probably say, I came to him with an idea in a very short window of how to do it, but they worked perfectly in what we could actually get done. So now we're really looking to develop it forward, and I think that the only reason that we have the space and the resources now to look at phase 3 research or production development or anything like that is all thanks to the support that we've had over the last year.
That's great. Thank you so much. Anything else for you, Mark, or are we good?
Just to say that working with SCS and CIC has been again a great experience over the past year. We've been down to SCS's site as well down at Bowness, and it's an amazing place, an amazing ambition that Sean's got for the place in terms of blending the social things that he's doing, but also the education and the academia and things as well. So he's got some great things going down on there. So I wish him all the best for the future, and hopefully we can carry on collaborating in the future going forward. So
that's great. Thank you so much. So just to kind of say that I mentioned this was the second in our series of 14 webinars, so we've still got another 12 to go, covering 7 themed sectors, including digital data, fintech, arts and creative. The next webinar is actually on the 30th of September, and that's going to speak to the ambitious aim of eradicating slavery from corporate supply chains. So just before I kind of do a final kind of thank you, I'm seeing a wee question here from Carlan, just to kind of reiterate that you don't need a formed project before contacting Interface, so we can chat through how best to pitch your idea to gain the expertise that you need, which is absolutely true. So overall, thank you so much for joining us. We kind of hope you found today's session informative and have some useful tips and ideas that you can take away. Obviously, huge thanks to our speakers, Sean and Mark. We'll also be sending you a follow-up email with contact details, as well as links to the slides and this webinar. So all that's left for me to say is thank you again for your time, and please do get in touch with us.
We've actually got 2 more questions that have just come in.
They're coming through in different columns, aren't they? Sorry.
I know. So Izzy said, one last question on funding. You mentioned some follow-up funding. Can the HEI help you source this?
At least in our experience, as Mark said, they were able to access an extra £2,500 funding to bolster on to the original SIV application. For the rest of the stuff, we actually went out and sourced it ourselves. But again, it's a much easier concept because you have the academics that can put you into the right positions, connect you in with the right people that you want to. So once we started to do that, you started to open doors with people like Scottish Enterprise, Scottish Executive, and then look at the funding that was available at governmental level that you can then access because your project is past the initial development stage of being engaged with a university.
Going forward, yes, we will probably, if any funding opportunities come up there that we think would be of interest to Sean, we'll obviously be passing those on to Sean. Likewise with PhD opportunities or postgraduate research opportunities and things, we're hoping to maybe pass those on to Sean as well and build some extra projects. So yes, we can help going forward. But Sean's, as he says, done an amazing job so far, getting lots of other research, getting lots of other funding from lots of other places. So he hasn't quite needed us that much for some of the ongoing stuff. So.
And just to kind of build on that from kind of an interface perspective, obviously the relationship is ultimately between the university and the company at that stage. But what we would be doing as well is kind of keeping an eye on the public domain for anything that we think is relevant and sharing it with the relationships with the companies and the unis. We're in touch with the companies on an ongoing basis as well, at least every 6 months. If we're, if everything's ticking along, we'll still touch in with the company after 6 months and have a kind of bit of an understanding if there's something else that they want to do and what else can we do to support. So yeah, and again, the door's open as well. If you're kind of thinking we can't get, how can we fund this project, come back and we'll kind of support between the three kind of partners to have a look and see what is out there. So Lisa, you're asking, does Interface help match partners to social science research, or is it mostly hard sciences or technologies? Absolutely, yes. And in actual fact, last year, in terms of engaging with arts humanities, it was higher than the science and engineering in terms of percentage. So yes, absolutely. Any idea or thought that you've got, could a university help? Please just get in touch and one of the team will chat through how that could become a reality. We'll check our 2 columns again, because I think that's us this time. Yeah. Okay, doke. So the thanks still stand, and we'll be back in touch with the information that I mentioned, including the links to this webinar. So thank you, Sean and Mark, and thank you all for attending. Bye.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.